So here we are at Abbey Road in London. Hi everybody, I hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm very excited. We're sitting here in probably the most famous studio in the world, Abbey Road. And we're about to interview Mr. Paul Thompson, who along with Christian Henson started Spitfire Audio. Spitfire Audio, I'm sure you know, are probably the most extensive, most used and highest rated string library, as well as percussion and many brass, woodwind, you name it, in the entire world. And it was started by these two guys who were working film composers who wanted something unique that just wasn't out there. So out of necessity, they created the most expansive and incredible library available. So without further ado, let's get talking to Mr. Paul Thompson. Paul, how the devil are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us down here. I mean, what a wonderful place to be able to do an interview.
Yes, it is marvellous, isn't it? And there's so many different parts. It's kind of like being in a warren or a maze. It's, yeah, there are lots and lots of different bits of the building that I've never seen.
I'm totally confused that you go downstairs, like few flights, and you go to the cafe, but you're still on the ground floor.
Yes. That is confusing.
I was like, how does that happen?
Yeah. No, it's an interesting building for sure. Yeah.
No, absolutely amazing. Yeah.
I spent most of my life building studios, it seems, you know, one different kind of type or another.
I relate to that.
Yeah.
So can you give me a little bit of your background? I mean, you're a composer.
Yes. So I started working, well, when I first moved to London, I'd done an MA in film and TV music, which was really useful to learn a lot of the theory, but obviously, you know, you just have to then kind of tramp the streets with your showreel and try and get work as a jobbing composer.
That just seems to me mind-boggling. I mean, how can you do that in this day and age?
Yeah, it was difficult back then. It's probably even more difficult now. But my MO was that I got 2 part-time jobs. So I worked Thursday to Saturday in Harrods, demoing pianos, and which was interesting. I'd be playing a 90 grand Imperial Grand, and the couple standing next to me were discussing whether it was the right shade of brown to go with the curtains. So what a terrible travesty. This piano's never going to be played. So that was interesting. And then I worked 3 nights from kind of 8 till 4 in the morning at Sainsbury's, cleaning out the vegetable cabinets. And that gave me a few days when I could just basically walk around Soho trying to get meetings. So
what you're saying, you're getting free food from Sainsbury's and piano practice at Harrods.
Yeah.
So there you go, you're covered.
Yeah. All the important stuff. So it was an interesting period, and I managed to get a job at a little music production company on Carnaby Street that did music for. The main part of their music was for jingles and adverts, and I wrote a lot of TV themes while I was there, and especially a lot of kind of British versions of American shows like Kids Say the Funniest Things and comedy awards and movie awards and things like that. So lots and lots of different styles, and that was the amazing thing about that period. I worked there for about 4 or 5 years, and I got to write every day. I'd come in and it was like, today you need to write something.
Did you get to keep your publishing, or was that through them?
It was a good deal. I think it was something like 75-25, something like that. So it was a very friendly, composer-friendly deal.
That is a good deal,
yeah. They were nice people. It was a very small company, so when I joined there were basically 3 composers. There were the 2 guys who owned the company and me, and I got my job there really by kind of hanging out, especially at the weekends on a Sunday, and making myself really useful.
Where did you go from next step? I mean, obviously you started working on some pretty major films. So what happened in between?
So I set up. I went to the ASCAP film scoring workshop in '99, which was about 5 weeks. Got the opportunity to conduct an orchestra playing one of my compositions to film at the end of that process. So that was really useful. Was that like a pay thing? No, it was you had to apply. I think there were 2,000 applicants that year.
How many spots?
10.
Wow.
Yeah. So Yeah, so it was quite competitive. So I did that, and then when I came back to the UK, I got my agent Eridal, and started kind of pitching for TV shows, for drama shows, and things like that. So I was like, right, I want to make a change of direction here. You know, I've done lots and lots of ads, lots of kind of below the line corporate stuff, lots of TV themes. I really want to get stuck into drama scoring. So from that point, I started doing more kind of drama TV shows and things like that, short films, you know, and then I guess, you know, you kind of, the opportunities kind of come from that work. The more work like that you do, you know, the more stuff.
Work begets work. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a funny kind of window of opportunity where people think you're too young to be able to do it. Because there's a whole part of being a composer that's like...
Well, people don't take... I remember in my late 20s, even in situations where you might be able to run circles around somebody, they don't take you seriously.
No. And there's a certain amount of being responsible for the budget and all that kind of stuff. That they go, well, can this person really do that? Because, you know, do we trust them with this? So it's not just that they think you know, that you're not probably experienced enough to do the work. It's like the whole... you're the head of the department or whatever, you know, so that kind of stuff as well. But then obviously there was an old saying in Soho amongst the advertising community, only the new will do. So, you know, everyone wants the hot young thing. So that's that weird
Which
kind of...
has served the British music industry fairly well.
Yes.
We can't really argue with that. Yeah.
No, you can't argue with that. No, you can't argue. But so there's probably a window of opportunity when you're just about old enough to be trustworthy and still new enough to
bring in something different.
Yeah.
A different perspective.
Yeah.
Incredible. So where'd you go from there? Because getting into film composition in a bigger way is a huge deal, which probably half the people watching this want to do. Yes.
So there's lots of, the beauty of film is that there are lots of things that you can do without being the named composer on the film. And part of that is down to the sheer amount of work that needs to be done. And the fact that we don't really have, you know, in the old days you would have the rough cut and then the fine cut, and that was locked. The picture was locked, and then the music was written, and that was it. And that rarely changed. It changed, for example, I think there was when John Williams was recording the final cue from E.T., the big long, you know, up into the sky thing. They'd run it a couple of times, and then Steven Spielberg went into the room and said, why don't you just switch the picture off, record it as an incredible piece of music, and I'll re-edit the picture to match the music.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never heard that before. That's amazing.
Yeah. So there were occasions when that would happen, but usually once the picture's locked, it's locked and that's it. Now, you know, when you can kind of play the picture over the internet to the theaters, literally, you know, the day before the film opens, everyone is constantly changing stuff up to the last minute, especially on big budget films. So there's a huge amount of work that needs doing with, you know, music editing, with people kind of adapting cues to fit the new picture. You know, maybe there's, you know, I mean, with the best will in the world and the best composer, if you've got 2 hours of music to write for an action movie, and you've got 4 weeks, it's physically impossible to create that much stuff. So you need a team of people who'll be led by one person's creative vision. So that kind of, you know, that kind of filters down across the whole music for film industry. So there are lots of things that I've done kind of leading up to, you know, writing an actual film score, where it would be, you know, I'd get a call because they needed music to play in a shopping mall, but it had to sound Christmassy. And they wanted it slightly related to the kind of theme of the film. You know, it's not always something that the music editors can do. Sometimes it needs a composer to look at as well. So there was a lot of that kind of work that I was doing. I was writing a lot of library music, which is, again, a great way to, you know, build your chops in different styles. Creating sounds for other people. You know, the most extreme example of that, I guess, was the kind of bespoke orchestra
where you ended up, yes.
Which then ended up on Avatar. And then and then all kinds of other things. So that's a kind of through line that I've never lost the joy for, and we still do stuff for for Hans on Dunkirk, the giant orchestra that became string orchestra that became Hans Zimmer Strings. That was a solving a problem. Can't cut through the sound of the Spitfire engines. What are we going to do? And in fact, I remember there was some online argument over, called it Hans Zimmer Strings, but if it was really Hans Zimmer Strings, then Hans would have written a demo. And then Hans went onto this forum and wrote a message saying, there is a demo. It's called Dunkirk. Well, yeah, okay. So, but we've always...
But I didn't know that. That's fantastic. I didn't know that was all your strings.
Yeah.
Now, I had heard that he has used them, and but I didn't know what in. So that's great to put two and two together.
It's funny because I originally wanted to do music at university, and I couldn't get in anywhere because I'd done double maths and physics, because that was what I was interested in. That was what I loved. But that kind of unqualified me for any music graduate course. So I had to pick the thing that was, of all of the kind of scientific areas that I was qualified for, what was the most interesting, and it was aeronautical. And then, when at the point where we started collecting license fees for the early Spitfire sounds from Harry and John Powell, and we needed a name to put on top of the invoice, and Christian lived around the corner from the Imperial War Museum, so he'd constantly walked his buggy around there when he was out, walking around trying to get the baby to sleep. And so he said, well, what about Spitfire? And I was like, oh yeah, that's great. Because it kind of gave me the idea of, people working in their garden sheds trying to invent something, and kind of jam jars and rubber bands and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that kind of idea of kind of homemade ingenuity, and, it seemed quite romantic. So yeah, that's where we went.
Well, I'm rather fond of the name myself as well.
I know, yes. Your studios.
Yep.
Yeah.
You founded Spitfire in 2007.
Yeah.
With your friend Christian Henson.
Yes.
Again, you were explaining earlier off camera.
Yeah.
Out of necessity.
It was a situation where we were both working on projects that needed a good kind of chamber string sound. And I think with directors, when you're trying to explain to them, a lot of the kind of sounds that we could use at the time were huge string sounds, very, very symphonic and lush and all that kind of stuff. And it's always easy to explain to directors, you're going to hire more people and it's going to sound bigger and better. But when they're hearing something that's like that as a demo, and then you say, we're actually going to get, 15 people to play it, and it's going to be really intimate, but kind of powerful and in your face, and they just don't trust you, I think. They just kind of have that, it's like, that doesn't sound right. Why would it sound better with fewer people? So we couldn't find anything, this was completely coincidentally and independently, we couldn't find anything we liked. So we decided one day, where we had been chatting, I think over MySpace. Christian had started writing a blog about a film score that he'd written in 24 hours, something crazy. And we shared an agent, which was Airedale, Maggie Rodford at Airedale. And so we'd started chatting to each other, and then we decided to meet for lunch in this pub, and we formulated a plan to record some chamber string samples that would be
great British ideas. Start at a pub.
Absolutely. And it was proper kind of jam jars and rubber bands and that kind of thing. We sort of scraped the money together, and the way that we financed it was we did a test session with, we called it violin twos, I think, just in case it went wrong, so we'd still have another go at the proper violins. And then we kind of put that together. That was a kind of half a favour at Air Lyndhurst, and we, it was a 3-hour session, so it wasn't very much material. And we then sent it out to a few people that we knew or had worked with. Harry Gregson Williams was one of them. A couple of days later, we rang him up and said, "What do you think? If we do this, would you like to come in on it?" And he said, "It's brilliant. I'm using it." He was using it in the Narnia demos that he was writing at the time.
Incredible.
Where's the rest of it? So we were like, "Oh, okay, let's do it." So that was the beginning. And it was only ever, I think we now referred to it as a kind of bespoke library, because it was kind of, you couldn't have released that as a commercial product because it had lots of quirks and curiosities.
Let's get a little bit of background, because not everybody's going to record some strings for the first time and then casually send them to a massively famous composer.
Yeah.
So how did you get to that point in your life?
I think there are two types of composer. There are composers who like to curate their sound. They gather things and they say, oh, I like the combination of this with that. And then there are composers who like to make sounds. And it's becoming a lot more popular now. A lot of people are, especially with back in the day when you were talking about the old Akai samplers and things like that, it was a lot more difficult. Yeah. But with especially with Gigasampler and the advent of streaming and then Contact, it became a lot easier to really record some quite serious stuff. So it was really just an extension of that. Those early experiments, making sounds for every project that you do. I'd been working with a friend of mine who was a violinist, Alison Dodds. We'd recorded some experimental violin stuff. And I've always been interested in the idea of samples being able to do the thing that you can't necessarily do in reality. So there's those two interesting sides to it. There's making a realistic mock-up for the director so that everyone's happy. And that, never used to be the case, but obviously now, because everyone can do it, they really, really expect it now. So it's got to sound as close as possible. So there's that aspect of it, but there's also the aspect of why not create something using the samples that you just couldn't do in reality. And that's always been a particular interest of mine as well. So we decided, well, people don't record samples like you record music. It's always got this kind of bizarrely sort of scientific approach, the anechoic chamber, put the mic right next to the instrument, and you never hear the instrument like that. So it always seemed really counterintuitive.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're saying. I always make this joke about my terrible out of tune piano. Is my terrible out of tune piano, where when we were kids, the idea of being able to record a Steinway in a beautiful environment was millions of pounds away in our brain. So everybody went for that. So you could find libraries of the world's most well-recorded, well-tuned, whatever, but what you couldn't actually find is anything that sounded real.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was like we always went for the ultimate.
Yeah, and I guess in a kind of purely kind of commercial way, that seems to be the obvious thing to do. Now,
devoid of all personality.
Devoid of personality. So Simon Franklin, who just completed Avatar 2, he always said of the original bespoke symphonic strings, there's a short note in the basses that has a bit of a chair squeak after it. And he said that's one of his favourite sounds in the entire library. He uses it on everything. Yeah. So you have, when you have, and the argument against that is always, well, if you've got that chair squeak, then every time you play that note, you hear the chair squeak. And you kind of go, well, work around it, because what you get really, with all that humanity and with all the kind of quirks and the odd split note in the trumpets, is just a real visceral feeling of reality. And when you start to, there's obviously a kind of, there's a safe area in the middle where you try and make it as kind of perfect in inverted commas as it can be without losing the humanity. But when you do err on the end of really kind of quite mucky, it really does sound amazing when you write a piece of music with it.
A lot of people creating these kinds of libraries were coming at from purely a technical perspective, where you're coming from it as composers, knowing how these sounds were actually going to be used in reality.
Yes, absolutely. And that was always, historically, all of our libraries were essentially to solve a musical problem, a compositional problem. There's one that's a really good example of that, and that is Christian was writing the score to a film which was shot in the Go-Between, shot in England, and there was kind of waving fields of grass, and the director wanted it to feel like the Mediterranean, but it clearly didn't look like that because it's the English countryside and there's no real strong sun and all that kind of stuff. So how to evoke that?
You don't have sun here?
Well, it wasn't that week of the year, basically.
That minute, that second.
Yeah. So the idea of having these kind of a mixture of charangos and ukuleles and all of these kind of everything that kind of makes you feel Mediterranean, and having them just gently plucking all at different times, and then using that instead of a kind of long note, like a strings long note or something like that. And that was incredibly successful as an experiment. And so we created a product called Mandolin Swarm, which kind of went into a lot more detail and recreated this kind of feel. And then that kind of then goes off and has its own life. So it then, the producer of one of the U2 albums, I think it's Songs of Innocence, rang us up and said, check out the first track on this new album. And it's Bono duetting with the Mandolin Swarm. It's basically two sounds, the swarm
beautiful.
with Bono singing over it. And you kind of go, wow, I never expected that to happen. That's so you try to solve one compositional problem, and then that provides a little nugget of creativity, which other people can find different kinds of inspiration in and interpret it in all kinds of different ways as well. So that's always been the kind of driving force, I think.
I was teasing you off camera about are you guys marketing geniuses, because when I first heard about your string libraries, it was like, oh yeah, but you have to know this guy, and there was a sense of exclusivity, which of course made it even more intriguing.
Yeah, it was a total accident. I mean, we'd
Genius
never,
move.
yeah, in retrospect, we never intended to create a company or anything like that. It was just, we just wanted better sounds, and we knew that there was a little kind of group of film composers, and it grew to include people like John Powell and David Arnold, Anne Dudley, Hans Zimmer, Patrick Doyle. We had this kind of group of people, James Horner, and they valued the way that we were recording it, and it just made it easier to sell pitches into directors and producers, I think. And so they encouraged, well, John Powell specifically kind of was, whipping us along from the back going, come on, brass next, when are you doing the woodwinds? And so it kind of became a bit of a snowball thing. And then the turning point was we recorded a percussion library with Joby Burgess, who is the player on the Abbey Road percussion that we're releasing at the moment, and incredible player. And we thought, right, we'll book a couple of weeks in the studio, we'll get Joby in, and we'll make a percussion library, and everyone will love that. And then when we'd actually done it and went out to them and said, right, because it was a kind of license fee arrangement that covered the costs. It wasn't designed to kind of make money. Everyone said, oh yeah, I kind of do my own percussion. That's the one thing that all of these composers, John Powell has a certain thing that he likes. He records in a certain theatre. Obviously Hans has his own thing that he does. Everyone's got their own kind of signature sound. And so a generic orchestral percussion library, however good it was, wasn't of interest. So we thought, oh, this is a bit of a disaster because we've spent all this money on it. And so we went back to Joby and we said, look, how do you feel about us trying to release this as a commercial product? We'll pay you a royalty, and we'll just see what happens. And it was round about the time when the internet had become fast enough for you to be able to download this stuff online. And so we which was lucky because we had a huge disaster pressing up a load of DVDs that where the printing was all offset, and it was a complete disaster. So we had to pivot onto the online delivery. I think there was also a volcano that exploded or erupted in Iceland, and that messed up shipping for a couple of months.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was all of that
fly,
stuff.
couldn't ship. Yeah.
Couldn't ship anything. So everything happened at the same time. So we kind of got dropped into this situation of, now you're a commercial entity, and also you have to deliver online because there isn't any other way of getting this out to people. And it was just chance, and that was really successful, and people liked it. And so, we kind of started from there, really.
Another thing that springs to mind is you're going into rooms like here, we're at Abbey Road, you're going into rooms where these composers are used to recording.
Yes.
You're using the same engineers, the same equipment, the same everything. So there's a familiarity in that they must absolutely love.
Yeah.
Plus, you've got the best ears in the world telling you whether it's good or bad.
It's a kind of virtuous circle. And it's interesting because one of the things that musicians, I think, are nervous about when they get involved in sampling is that old argument of, are we kind of putting ourselves out of a job? And I think this has persisted since there was that whole thing that happened in the 80s with synths, where synths were banned from Top of the Pops for a while because it was, putting the string players out of a job. And the other interesting thing is that it provides a different kind of opportunity. I mean, one of the things that on every product that we've ever released, we've paid the musicians royalties. And that has been a kind of founding, something that was incredibly important to us right at the very beginning. And I'm not aware of any other company that does that. And so all of the string players that play on any of our orchestral lines, or any of the players, they all get a royalty.
It's wonderful.
I think that you've got a kind of it absolutely does drive a new form of creativity, because the other beauty of it is that you can, as composers, we love having lots of different sounds. And, string players kind of think, right, okay, how can I do this differently? And this happens anyway. I mean, we've worked with the LCO. They've worked with,
I'm just thinking of string sessions in Los Angeles and trying to get people to do double something like, do we have to? Actually, there was a mistake in the second bar. You were sort of
Play it again.
Stretching the truth a little bit just so you can get a double.
We have a way around that in the UK, which is that if you've booked 2 sessions, morning and afternoon session, you can do the same cue as long as it's split across the 2 sessions. So it's fine to double in the afternoon. And because the
they know they've got a royalty now, so they're going to push a little bit harder.
Oh yeah, well that's true.
That's what I was thinking. It's very smart of you.
Yeah. So but the other interesting thing is, and what Joby found with this first release was, because he had thought that, am I putting myself out of a job? Don't really know, but let's go for it and see what happens. Within the first year of release, he'd picked up 3 new film composer clients who played the sounds on their demos. Were like, I want that person who played this stuff, so that's who I'm going to book when I go over to London to record. So there was it was also a way of kind of promoting, our musicians over here and how great they are, and having people playing the stuff all over the world. But also, maybe there's a kid on the other side of the world who's bought a product, and so a part of the income from that product goes to the musicians, and maybe that kid would never have been in a situation to hire the musicians, but nevertheless, they're earning an income.
Of saying, I'm using some strings, percussion, or whatever that was recorded at Abbey Road, the studio that made the record. It's
exactly,
that stuff is so powerful.
Yeah, and I think people don't put enough weight. Some people don't put enough weight on where the thing is recorded. And I think that it's
so important.
It's so important, isn't it?
If you can say to a band, even if you're just going in for one day to cut drums at a room, like here, it's so inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you play better when you've got that sound coming back at you.
So talking about Abbey Road, how did the collaboration come about?
So we started talking to Merrick probably 4 years ago, and we had an idea about recording. I mean, the history of Abbey Road and how film soundtracks started to be recorded in Abbey Road is both incredibly romantic, and the notion that the room was nearly lost and then saved by the movement of Eric Tomlinson and his company to kind of do a joint venture here. That whole idea, and that all of the films that were recorded here, especially in the early 80s, for people of kind of my vintage, that's your childhood, and that's the sound of of all of the stuff that you loved in your
I'm
childhood.
of a similar vintage. So
Yeah. And so you kind of think, well, wouldn't it be fantastic if people could have that sound and be able to write music and hear that sound coming back at them? So that was the kind of beginning of the discussions of a collaboration. And then it was, okay, so how are we going to do this? How are we going to kind of, make it so that, I mean, obviously the opportunity to record an orchestral sample library here, was incredibly exciting. And so immediately you think, well, it's going to be the most detailed orchestral sample library we've ever created. And yes, we're doing that. But we also wanted to do something that was more of a kind of fantastic sketch pad for people. So they could write orchestral music, even with, very little experience or knowledge of, we've always wanted it to just spring out of the box. So when you put your hands down, you go, wow, that's the sound. You don't have to, start EQing and panning and compressing and all that kind of stuff. We want it to just sound incredible. But it was, how do we get something into people's hands as quickly as possible? And so that kind of gave us the idea for Abbey Road 1, which was the kind of sketchpad package. And then we did some bolt-ons to that, which were that was the orchestral foundations. And then we added certain things, which we called the selections. And the point of those was to do a specific job incredibly well. So when you're doing those fast scatteru runs with the 2 flutes and a piccolo, let's just record that, make it absolutely brilliant at doing that, which requires different methodologies of how you record notes and the connections between the notes and things like that. And then that becomes its own thing. So people could kind of put together their a bit like Hornby sort of train set thing. It's like, well, I'm really interested in this. I don't want low woodwinds, but I definitely want the horns. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. So people could curate their own sound. And
so
then,
double O gauge and the N gauge.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. and the cow standing next to the So that was the idea. And then from that, we kind of once we got that up and running, then our attention turned to, right, now we go into detail. And then of course COVID hit. So the obvious starting point was percussion, where you have one person standing in the studio.
So can you tell me a little bit about, what's the concept behind your free labs plugins and samples?
Yeah, so that started, we decided to launch that one year at Christmas as a way of raising money for UNICEF. And people originally put in like a donation of £2 or something minimum, $2. And they would get the thing, and it was all via the Just Giving website. So it just it kind of bypassed us altogether. And then after a few years, we were developing our own software platform, and it became obvious that the requirement for the kind of full version of Contact was a bit of a blocker for what we were trying to do, which was to get it to as many people as possible. And these were all little instruments that, like I said earlier, we make stuff for projects. So, they're always full of character, like a kind of charango with lots of fingernail sort of noise. Simple, but really full of character. And so we relaunched Labs as a kind of separate project where it was just basically totally free. So it's in lieu of what was going via Just Giving, and it was just going to UNICEF. We then decided to give a proportion of our turnover to charities that we were supporting, which were Safer London, based in London. We supported Magic Breakfast, who give breakfasts to children who get to school with an empty tummy. We've got charity partner Saffron, who promote music events and kind of connections between people for female, but also gender non-conforming and non-binary people and things like that. So there's a lot of different kind of projects that we've supported over the years as part of the Labs thing. So Labs still has its roots in a kind of charitable cause, but it is a way for us to kind of get really good quality sounds into the hands of people who just can't afford to buy.
Beautiful.
So, and one of the really wonderful things we found was people start contacting us saying, check out this track. So there's a track on Beyonce's Lion King album, which was almost all labs, the backing track. And we've had, there's other people who've contacted us saying, you won't believe what I used on this, and because the sounds are great, they're simple, but they've got a lot of love in them. So that's they find their way into producers' toolkits as well.
Incredible. So, can you give me a backstory on the role of Simon Rhodes and what other engineers you worked with?
Yes. So Simon is an incredible engineer, and I first got to know him when we started working when they were doing Avatar, the first Avatar, and the team were using the bespoke library, and that became quite an important part of the post-production process. And I just found it fascinating how they were working, and that Simon was mixing stuff. They were kind of running a 24-hour operation, so Simon would be mixing while they were writing, and James was writing, and Simon Franklin was doing was expanding stuff out and doing production on things and all that kind of stuff. And so I'd always thought I'd love to get Simon to record something. And so when we started the process of talking about Abbey Road, I was like, well, for me, it's got to be Simon Rhodes, because I don't know. I think engineers obviously have a kind of sonic signature, and I think you gravitate as a composer or or a producer. You gravitate towards people for their similar aesthetic, maybe, and that was what I just loved the mixes and the recordings that Simon had done, and so for me, it was a dream come true to be able to get him to to engineer and record this.
Do you have any specific memories of what equipment you used that was unique to the project?
We did. You have a couple of vintage pathways, so we used some of the fantastic original mics and the console. Which console was it?
TG.
The TG.
You did use the TG. Wonderful.
So we put the and you're also using tape. So we had a couple of signal paths that we were recording all the time. That, I mean, again, the fact that there is so much incredible equipment here from that period that's maintained to such a high standard, I don't really know of anywhere else that you could have done that. I mean,
not the same place that invented and created it.
No,
well.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So
incredibly unique.
Yeah. So we had that running, and then obviously some of the modern mics that Abbey Road make, the Reds, and then there's a kind of standard layout and kind of ingredients list, the Deca tree and all of that kind of stuff. But again, with Simon, he got that he got the bit between his teeth, and so he put up two Deca trees, so one with a more directional selection and one with the omni selection. So you've got, there's all kinds of different flavors within the microphones that you can mix together, and you can create your own sound, even just from the mics, from the mics that you select. I mean, yeah.
So Simon did Studio One. Who
Yes.
engineered the Studio 2 stuff?
So for the Studio 2 strings, we've got Sam O'Cal to do that, and Sam has obviously worked a huge amount on the Beatles reissues recently, and knew the kind of source material quite intimately. The fantastic records that Abbey Road keep of what's used on where, on which session, obviously helped us to kind of put together again a kind of vintage version of the same session setup, but also we put all the modern mics up as well, so we've got a really beautifully crisp modern sound for that as well. But the idea there for Abbey Road 2 was to recreate what is arguably the most famous string sound ever recorded. So yeah, I mean, Eleanor Rigby, and if you dial up the vintage selections in Abbey Road 2 and replay that, it just sounds like it's the same recording. It really is amazing.
It's a remarkable sound, isn't it? When I think of it, it's sort of very close sounding.
Yeah.
I remember Hugh telling me that they came in to do some like hand claps or choir, and he realized, oh, it's not a big room sound. It's not like a huge room sound. It's a very close, warm sound.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, on the close mics, you obviously always get a feel of the room around it. And Studio 2, I've recorded a film score in there for the film Half a Yellow Sun, which was a kind of like a John Barry-esque kind of score, like period, set in the Biafran Civil War. And I think that the thing that you get from it is almost like the old sound of maybe the Bond movies from the 70s and things like that. It's that kind of, you can feel the space around the sound, but it's not that reverberant.
Exactly, yeah.
And also the more bodies you put in the room, the
less reverberant it gets.
The less reverberant it gets. So it kind of tightens up as you go. But yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, the beauty of that kind of incredible, recording of the super powerful, intimate, close mic'd thing, which was quite unusual and startling sounding. I think it must have been at the time.
I think it confuses people because they expect, when they say room tone, they think of ambience.
Yes.
And yet that has such a unique sound, which has got nothing to do with long decay times.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, there must be a scientific way of describing it, but in my kind of slightly pseudo-scientific way, I've always kind of thought, well, if you're sitting in front of a group of players, at least 50% surely of what you're hearing has got to be the sound that's bounced off all the early reflections and all that kind of stuff. There's a certain amount that comes direct to you, but there's a huge amount that comes from the room. And so that kind of gives the sound its character. And it's like we were saying before, it's so important, that part of the sound.
Did you do that to tape as well?
There was tape involved, yes. But it's a combination. We've kind of traditionally recorded to get the character of tape on specific things where we think it's important.
Are you recording to tape then transferring afterwards, or are you coming off the repro head?
Yeah, we're coming off the repro head. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that's what we did with the J37s as well. I think we were doing the same technique there. So there's a kind of there's an element of risk, because obviously you kind of get the odd dropout and things like that you have to go back and pick up stuff. But on the whole, the benefit that you get from it outweighs the negatives.
So Studio 1 was the TG console and what tape machine?
Studio tape machine, so modern 24-track tape machine.
Lovely.
And then in Studio 2, the Red Desk and the J37 tape.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, all of this talk of recording here at Abbey Road, can we hear some stuff?
Absolutely.
Love to go through it. It'd be amazing.
Let's dive in.
So can you take us through Abbey Road 1?
Yes. So the idea is really kind of what is the stuff that you use 90 to 95% of the time. Let's capture that stuff in really kind of good detail. So for example, here with the low strings, we've got this spiccato short patch, but it's very, very dynamic because there are 5 different recordings. So as you hit the keyboard harder, it triggers the higher dynamic. That's the detail that we decided was the important thing to have. So we're always trying to kind of focus our firepower on what's most useful in a kind of composition or production capacity. And for this, it's because it's like a kind of sketch pad, we've done low strings and high strings. So you've got, it's not broken out into cellos, basses and all that kind of thing. But we've tried to make it as kind of usable as possible and as with the key sounds that you want. So for example, you have, and these are kind of important to use as well. So I always have 2 faders set up. One is CC11, which is just expression. It's just a generic volume control. And then this one is CC1, and that takes you through the dynamics for long notes. So with short notes, obviously it's velocity sensitive. For the long notes, you start quiet. then as you go through the dynamics, it becomes kind of, the players are playing louder and it becomes more intense. Here as well, we've got we've kind of got a kind of performed vibrato. In fact, if I show you on the dial here are the different controls that you can. All of these are CC assignable, so you can set up your faders exactly how you want them. But you can control. There's an additional reverb here which you can add on, which is not playing at the moment. You can alter the level of the release. So when you let go of the note, you get the release plays, and that gives you the kind of sound of the room. Mm-hmm. Some people want that down a bit for specific purposes. You can kind of dial in tighter to the short notes, and then you can control the vibrato as well.
Is the vibrato touch sensitive?
So the vibrato is controlled from a fader.
From a fader.
So you can hear that. And I think really the dynamic and the vibrato are the two things that I kind of perform to give me. I think with samples, it's
make it sound like a human being played.
Exactly. It's all about the musicality of it and the expressiveness of it. And so whatever you can do to kind of imbue that into the sound is.
Did you find by just saying low strings, you're taking away, because not everybody's a string arranger that understands what a cello is going to do, what a double bass is going to do,
Exactly. And so it's to make it kind of as accessible as possible. Because I think that, that people have a kind of inbuilt kind of fear of orchestral music. There's really nothing to it. It's just a bunch of sounds. So the same way that you would get a load of synths up, get a load of orchestral sounds up and just play around with it. And the way that we record it gives you the correct range. So there's nothing that you're going to play that's outside the playable range of the instrument.
Great.
And also it sounds real. So we haven't kind of faked stuff. So, when you get to the brass, in fact, let's go to low brass. And you can kind of hear this really clearly on the staccato, on the short notes. So you can hear the lower you go, the patchier the performance becomes, in the sense that the players, certain notes can ring out really loudly, and then some of them take a while to speak. So you can hear, for example, and this is a function of the way that the trombone works. So you've got certain notes, the range of normal playable notes goes down, then there's a little bit of a gap, and then there's certain playable notes that are called pedal notes. And players have a way of kind of fudging things, but essentially when you're in that range, it all becomes a little bit more haphazard. And so we've kind of kept that so that what you're hearing is realistic.
I've always found brass to be one of the kind of sorts the men out from the boys, the women out from the girls. It's that it can be really obvious if it's fake.
Yes, exactly.
And super high strings.
Yeah. So exactly. So on the high strings, one of the things that's we really love is the sound of muted strings. So you get a little, usually it's a kind of rubber or plastic mute that goes on the bridge, and it damps it changes the harmonic makeup of the sound. So in fact, let me compare it. So if you hear the normal high string sound, which is unmuted, and then we switch to the muted sound. It's CS because the Italian phrase is con sordino, with mute. So it's a kind of, the classic thing is you hear it in that kind of, it's the Jerry Goldsmith sort of, that beautiful melodic lines when you've got those things going, and it just sounds rich and soft and kind of beautiful. So, this is another one of those situations where, traditionally in orchestral sample libraries, a lot of that would have been EQ'd as a kind of, simulation of sordino, but actually the real things just sounds different and so good that you just have to record it. So that's hence why it appears in this kind of restricted palette.
I always used to take string libraries and use the Waves Morphoda to put that that whisper, so it actually sounded like I could hear some air on it.
Yes.
Otherwise, it was just ee.
Exactly, exactly. And actually, you know, it's funny because we've constantly had this with, you know, if I put up the, I mean, you can hear it in there. And sometimes we get people writing in and saying, "Oh, there's a hiss on this on the strings as they get higher." And you're like, "That's the sound of the rosin on the bows.
Yeah.
That is on the bow hitting the string. That's actually
What
happens. Yeah, when you're actually standing in front of them. That's what.
That's
it sounds
what I was
like.
trying to emulate.
Yeah,
And you've got it in there.
and it's in there. Well, we haven't, you know, and that's also the thing. It's like, do we just do the minimum that you need technically to make it work? Obviously, you've got to kind of get rid of a certain amount of the noise floor, because if you hit one note and you've got a normal noise floor, that's great. If you then hit a chord, you know, with 8 notes in it, you've got 8 noise floors. So you have to reduce the noise floor, and you have to be a little bit careful.
I can ask you this question: Do you find MIDI restrictive? Do you feel like there's enough velocity in there?
Yeah,
Because
I think
you seem
so.
to overcome it.
Yeah.
How do you feel like you've overcome it compared with?
I think that it's mainly about making sure that you're recording the extremes of the instrument. So when, and I don't mean like going to a ludicrous extreme of trying to get people so that their bows explode, but you get it a really nice, good, strong, loud as the players would usually play when they're playing normal music, and then make sure you get the really soft stuff. Then we've got a whole system that we use to make sure that when you play it back, when you hear it back from the sample engine, it's at the right volume, because people have a slightly confused idea of what, you know, like a PPP, a super quiet string note on the violin sounds like, because usually when you're listening to it in a mix, it's been, you know, it's been pushed up. So we go for a really accurate acoustic balance of what it would sound like in the room. And then beyond that, you've got this extra control where you can kind of tame things with the volume control there. And that, I find that with that combination, that gives me everything I need to do to you know, to write music that sounds musical.
Fantastic. So this is one. So this is the Simon Rhodes one.
Yes. So you've got the sound of the players, and these are the, you know, just incredible London first call players who play on, you know, all the film scores that are recorded here. And you've got Simon's mix up here. Now, across these mix pages, you've got a variety of options. When you're setting up for an orchestral session, let's turn the mix off for a second. There's the usual things that you would do was you would have the tree up first. Now, as I say, you've got a selection of 2 here. This is the omnidirectional one, which is the standard, you know, might be the M50s or whatever. But these are the, this is the normal sound of the kind of Decca tree. And that's a very familiar sound to everybody. That's what you usually hear. Now, if you want this particular part to have a bit more bite, you might put in the close mics, and immediately you get the crispness from the attack of the brass, of the horns, but also it gives you a little bit more of the direction. So if I just solo that, let's turn that up a bit. So you can hear that component of the sound, and you can just dial it in, you know. It might be that in a normal soundtrack recording, the close mics don't really play a significant part until that instrument is going to be featured, and then maybe it would get pushed up. Now, in addition to that, you've got the outriggers. So if the Decca tree is right in the middle, the outriggers are on the same vertical plane, but they're out at the side. And they give, if I play it, they give a wider sense of the sound. It's almost like, I always think of it as being more filmic, but it's easy to say everything is filmic, but it gives you that slightly wider, more 3D feel. And actually a lot of the engineers who regularly record orchestral stuff just regard the outriggers as part of the tree, so that they wouldn't separate these out. But in our context, it's useful for the end user to have that control, because if you hear the difference between just the tree, and then we switch the outriggers in as well. then you get that kind of, the sound goes out to the side slightly, which is really useful. Then with the ambient mics, those are just the most distant mics. And you've got something that's a really interesting idea that in fact was an idea that John Powell suggested to me years ago, which is traditionally when you're sampling, you put out the mics that are going to go on the instrument, the close mics, you've got the decatry, you've got your outriggers and ambience and all that kind of stuff. But there's one thing that you don't hear, which is the spill of
into the other
mics.
Yeah, right.
And so what we've done here is we've got all of the mics up all the time, and then everything that isn't direct on the horns goes into the spill. So it sounds kind of slightly distant on its own, but the effect that you have when you build up a production and you start to add in the spill is that it's really difficult to describe, but it's almost like the soundstage. If you imagine it's slightly blurry 3D, and then as you bring the spill in, it kind of focuses things. So you start to get much more of your ears sense the directionality of everything. It's just, it's just a really useful extra.
Makes perfect sense. I've tried on lots of virtual instruments. I'll tell people to run multiple delays, all out of time, really quiet, and then blend them up underneath to try and randomize stuff.
Right.
And the spill's doing that for you because it's giving you tons of different listing.
Absolutely.
And also phase cancellation. We're always afraid of it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the sound of how we hear things.
Yes, exactly. So why remove it?
Yeah.
And then we've got these two fabulous vintage signals. So this one, everything as you roll over on the panel gives you little clues in the bottom left-hand corner. So this is the RM1Bs. So it gives you that kind of, I don't know, black and white film vibe. And then we've got this second vintage signal, which are, again, very, very old classic ribbons. And these are the conductor position.
Softer on the high end.
Yeah,
very nice.
yeah. So
I like that most.
Yeah.
I probably end up using that a lot. Yeah.
And then one of the things that we wanted to do was there's a kind of conflict sometimes between people saying, right, I want everything in position, because that's obviously the easiest way to record an orchestra, because when you reassemble the mix, it's just going to be super easy because everything sounds right. But sometimes you might want to either create your own seating arrangement. So you might want to say, well, I don't want the horns where they usually sit, I want them somewhere else. Or you might want a much more kind of what we've called pop close, but a kind of more, stereo pair in front of the instrument, and then just, really kind of have it pounding into your, like that. And then
dramatically different, yes.
Yeah, and then you've got the room sound that goes along with that, which gives you the kind of depth as well. So from all of those different signals, you've really got tons and tons of control. And one of the things that we've always wanted to do is always wanted to give people the ability to make it sound their own. So they don't, you don't hear it and immediately go, oh, I know what that is. That's that's Abbey Road 1 horns. People can just change it.
Quick dumb question. So mix 1, you set up a blend.
Yes.
And then mix 2, and then you can.
Yeah, that's Simon's two different mixes. So this one based around the first decatry, and this one based around the second one.
Okay.
And so and they're quite different as well. So if we hear, that's mix 1, and then here's mix 2. Yeah, so they're different sounds, but it means it's really resource light on the computer, because you're only playing back a stereo pair basically for each sound. So within the kind of the overall package, you've got a full orchestra sound, which gives you a blend of everything. You've got your brass and your woodwinds. There's a whole load of fantastic percussion. And then, as I said before, there's these selections. So with things like this, with the cellos and basses, They are. I know I'm going to have loads of modernist 20th century composers complaining about me saying this, but it is a fact that in the majority of literature, the cellos and basses play in octaves a lot of the time, and therefore, why not record them in octaves to get that sound? So for this particular thing, it's all about this kind of. And it's just a beautiful sound. So I think it's really useful to have that. Yeah, and we've got the kind of essential, the essential kind of articulations that you might use, those performance styles.
Well, you're designing something for somebody that maybe is a reasonable keyboard player, but it's not a string arranger.
Exactly. Yeah. So make it as easy as possible, really, and that runs through all of the selections. So we've got these. The idea of these horns, thematic horns and thematic trumpets, is to be able to perform, it's to be able to get the, everything. We're always kind of listening to this sound in the context of film scoring, because there's so much incredible music that's been written for film and recorded in this room. So what are the things that you need to be able to kind of reproduce that stuff? And those beautiful horns, and of course trumpets. And this is recorded again. It's the direction, and we obviously develop a lot of this stuff with the musicians themselves. So with the trumpet section, we had a conversation with them, and the idea was that one of the trumpets would kind of lead the way, and the others would be their kind of backup, and that's how they tend to record these kind of melodies. And again, here we've gone from, we haven't recorded super soft for this particular patch. It's gone from kind of a medium volume MF all the way up to the real laser powerful stuff at the top. So you've got that,
I keep thinking about the fact that musicians are getting royalties. So you can go to them and say, you've done these before, these libraries.
Yeah.
What would you do differently to make this successful so you can actually make some money out of it?
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's a wonderful thing, because obviously it's great for, for musicians
got a vested interest to actually
to have it,
bring
to
the
have
ideas, and I love
a part kind of ownership almost of it.
Yep.
So so a lot of cool sounds in there, and with the percussion we did a variety of things. So we got the percussionists again to kind of say, right, let's get all the stuff that we know we want, and then what also sounds great together. And they said, well, if we saw a certain part, we might play it with toms and octabands together. Is a really cool sound. And we've got kind of different types of bass drum. So this is the kind of soft boom is a sound that comes from the way that the performers are hitting the bass drums, but also you've got Simon has mic'd it a certain way, and then what we end up with is that incredible kind of pulse that.
Well, I hope that comes through on YouTube.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, there's a good amount of low end in there.
Oh, fantastic!
But you've also got standard bass drums, and then you've got Verdi bass drums, and so you've got the kind of different styles of things, and also these are multiplayer patches as well. So it's everything is kind of larger than life, and really designed for
Can I hear some snares?
So my favourites are piccolo snares, but we've also got the standard ones as well. Different, side stick and all that kind of stuff. So you can, and this is in Abbey Road 1. This is a kind of again, like I was saying, a kind of generic sketchpad type sound. Mm-hmm. So when we go to the high percussion, for example, that is incredibly detailed. So you've got 4 different snare drums, and the number of different playing styles that recorded is way more. You've got left and right hand control and all of that kind of stuff. So in fact, let me just quickly stick it on there and then you can see the difference. So as you can see here, we've got 2 piccolo snares and then we've got a variety of other sizes. So if I just load up the first piccolo snare, you've got the option down here to switch on right and left hand mapping. And then you can see all of the different articulations and playing styles that you've got down here. So two-handed playing as well, so they're duplicated a couple of octaves apart. And as you can hear, it's hugely dynamic. Brushes, you know, and different.
Ooh.
I mean,
it's great.
And also you've got soft takeover. So for example, if I, this is an option so that you can use velocity to determine the starting dynamic. And then when you reach that velocity on the mod wheel, it takes over and then you have mod wheel control. So you can do stuff where, you know, you can, where I'm kind of putting a little swell at the end, but I'm not getting that kind of horrible thing that happens where you start and then you realize that you're actually, you know, the mod wheel isn't matched up with the...
It doesn't sound like a machine gun.
It sounds, exactly, yeah. So going back to this, I mean, maybe it might be interesting to just hear what it kind of all sounds like together.
That'd be amazing.
So this is quite interesting because we're using the full orchestra patch. So if I go up to there, I've kind of put, and this is a blend of, you know, wood, strings and brass. And again, it's, you know, you've got get that kind of certain instruments come through as you change the dynamic, and you know, it's great fun to just play, you know, all that kind of stuff, and you know, things like that. But if we go back to long, let's just have a look at a couple of sections in this track. So you get the idea. You know, the key thing about it is that you've got a lot of dynamic control. You've got the sections are split up in logical ways. So the trumpets are separate from the horns, separate from the low brass, which is, you know, the trombones and the tuba. And then you've got your kind of most used articulations in the core package. So you can cover pretty much, you know, everything you want to do. There's a section here where I've written that, like we were talking about Jerry Goldsmith earlier, bit of a kind of Basic Instinct-y rip-off. And we've got the consordino strings. I think that the beauty of it is that you haven't, we're not even using legato patches in that, which is a patch where, you know, you're holding down a note, and if you then press a new note, it plays the transition, what would happen on the real instrument between the first note and the second note, and then you hear the second note. And those are really great. Those patches appear in the selections where we're looking at specific jobs like the woodwind runs and things like that, where they're very important. But for the purposes of a kind of really simple orchestral sketch pad, you can't really tell that that's not a legato patch. I mean, it sounds great. It So it's partly the arrangement. So if I could just play you this bit, so this bit solo. And then in the low strings, that
little piece there.
Yeah,
is
so
just
that's
superb.
So the horns, yeah, they're so that's a kind of combination of the way that the horns play when they're really soft, because the instrument points backwards. You always kind of get it from the room much more than you hear the sound of it. So if you ever want anything to kind of feel like it's just kind of floating in the background, soft horns is the perfect sound for that. But you know, on all of this stuff, I've got the, you know, the mix one up, and that's it. So I'm not even going into the mics and, you know, messing around with stuff. It's just how it comes out the box. And then, you know, and then it's just about, I think that, you know, you don't need to be able to read music. I would always encourage people to learn to read music because it's an incredibly useful skill, but you don't have to be able to, you know, do that. Just use your ears and listen to a piece that you love. And as long as you've got a sample library that sounds realistic, you can figure it out. You can work out, oh, right, okay, is that horns or is that trombones? Play it on both patches. Okay, that's the horns. And that's just how, I mean, that's how I learned. Nobody, you know, I didn't go to college to learn orchestration or anything like that. I just taught myself, basically.
There's a lot of music education, YouTube education, relies very heavily on theory. Yeah. And yet it's been my experience writing myself, but also producing incredible writers, that I've never actually met one that uses theory. It's not directly. Yeah. So when you're writing, is it all instinctive?
I have a couple of different ways of doing it. So with this, I basically I busked stuff in and thought, right, okay, what comes next? And that is, like, I would call that improvisational writing. And it is useful to be, you know, a reasonably good pianist or keyboard player. Not essential, but it saves you fumbling around as much. So that type of writing works easier if you're a keyboard player. And I know that, you know, I've heard John Powell has said that when he's writing a score, he often just does it like that. Like, he'll get to a point, he'll back up 8 bars, listen, and at the point where it stops, he's like, what comes next? And you hear it in your head, and then you try and work out what that is. And that's a great way of writing. I think that I do sometimes write stuff onto paper. And when I'm doing that, it's more because I'm trying to put more theory into it, if you know what I mean. So I'll be trying to work out, okay, right, I've got this chord and I want to try and get to that note. So how am I going to move? So you kind of, and then what I would say is you kind of throw the theory out. So if you're going from there to there, and your first stage is G minor, then where are you going to? Well, you start with that and then see what you can do. So you could do E flat major, E flat minor. They both sound different. So has one feel, has another feel. But you just do it with anything. I mean, and it doesn't need to be one of the 4 kind of key notes of the chord, you know, like there or, you know, or here. It could be an extension of the chord. So you could instead go from G minor, and we're going to put B flat on the top. So I'm going to go to F minor. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes that is a process of experimentation that I can't keep it in my head. So I write it down on paper. And sometimes I'm writing it down on score paper, but sometimes it will be just, I'll just have a sheet of A4 and I'll just go, right, C minor, F minor, you know, 13, whatever, and try and kind of work it out that way. And they both have their uses. You know, sometimes if you plan something out, Eric Whittaker is an incredible choral composer. will plan out a piece on a huge piece of paper, and he'll draw symbols and, you know, different diagrams and things that kind of show him how he wants it to go in a kind of grand non-musical sense. And then when he's
more of an emotional sense.
Exactly, an emotional chart. And then when you've got that in place, that kind of helps you to not go off in a sort of odd direction. And
I just wonder how often somebody who's composing at a high level is thinking, oh, I want this to be this mode or that mode or this.
Oh, rarely, I think.
I know. Well, thank you for saying that, because I feel like all music education online seems to be talking about that as though that's the process.
Yeah. I think that's useful for experimenting and finding new things. But then once you're in the mode of, to coin a phrase, a mode of actually writing, all that goes out the window, and you're just kind of going by gut feel, really. What's, you know, especially when you're writing to picture, there's you're merely part of a team that has to express a story. So you have to say, well, what am I doing? What am I supposed to be saying here? So which of those moves says that correctly, and tells the story in the best way? And it's nothing to do with, you know, all the scales and modes and everything just goes out the window. It's nothing to do with any of that. It's just about emotion. What's your emotional reaction to what you're hearing? This is Abbey Road 2. So we have 5 string players in the studio, arranged and positioned in exactly the same way as they were positioned for the Beatles recording. And we've got a variety of different patches. So the ensemble patch here, you're hearing everything. And the way that we've done that is using this clever little widget here, which kind of determines where the different instruments come in and fade out across the range. So if I just kind of go, it's pretty seamless. So you could sort of be like, you know, not really looking for realism. I mean, you can kind of do that and you get a bit of a blend of different things. But if I turn multi-voice off and then play something, now you're hearing one player assigned to each note. So, which makes the sound becomes slightly more intimate, and it becomes, you know, a lot more kind of realistic, because you've got that arrangement happening in the background without really having to do anything. The beauty of having these things, which are just incredibly easy to change, is that you can, if you have a part, an arrangement that you're playing in, and you kind of get to that point where you think, oh, actually, that's a little bit heavy at the bottom end, you can say, right, well, I'm gonna start the bass fading out a bit earlier. I'm gonna fade the cello in a bit. And then you're hearing more of the kind of viola upwards. That changes the arrangement slightly. And actually, we could even, you know, tweak that. So as you get from the bottom, you can see, you know, exactly how you're hearing more of the change between the instruments at this stage. So that's a cool little thing. And really, really great for just kind of sketching stuff out. You know, you've got all of the usual articulations that you want. There's these kind of longer things that are, you know, one of the things that we went into in quite a lot of detail was we listened and we worked with the musicians on this as well, to your earlier point. We went into a huge amount of detail listening to the way that Eleanor Rigby was performed. And there's a certain style to it, for example, the marcatos. So you can hear there's a little bit of vibrato in there, and it's quite stylized, and that gives us a really lovely characteristic sound, as opposed to a kind of more generic, just harder attack. And there's all kinds of little detail that you can get around the start of the attack. So, you know, do the players start with the bow on the string? How fast do they initiate the note? Do they allow it to kind of go in a kind of round attack, or do they start with a really hard, fierce attack? There's all this kind of stuff. on the kind of performance side of making a sample library that really affects the outcome. And we've made so many string libraries by this point that we've really kind of worked out how to get a really incredible performance from the players. And it's just, when you combine that with this incredible room and the mics and everything, it's just absolutely nuts. So when we go into the long notes, you've got the normal kind of sound. Again, we've got this dynamic control here. So
gorgeous.
And then you've got all of the other crunchy, great stuff as well. So, sol pont, and again that goes up to the high dynamics as well. There's two different things here that are often confused: soltasto and flautando, and they've got a slightly similar kind of performance style. Soltasto means literally over the fingerboard. So the bow is so if you imagine that's the violin, and you've got the bridge here, and the fingerboard is about there. Usually the bow is between the end of the fingerboard and the bridge. But if you move the bow up that way, the way that you suppress some harmonics gives you this sound. If I play this, it's usually a soft. And it's a really delicate and beautiful sound. But there's this one as well, which is flautando, which means flute-like, but tends to be a slightly faster, lighter bow. And it's similar. It's got that really lovely kind of delicacy to it.
Yeah.
And then,
you really do feel like you're hearing air around the strings.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You've got all this kind of stuff. It always reminds me of the opening of one of the tracks on Seal's first album. I can't remember why. It's probably, there's a string trill at the beginning of one of the tracks and every time I play a trill chord, it sounds like that. All of that kind of stuff. You've got your tremolos, which are just back and forth. And then, as before, we get into now, we've got lots and lots of different short notes. So there's that spiccatissimo, which is really, really spiky. This one, slightly longer still, the marcato. So when you're writing a part, and this is great for pop arranging, when you're writing a part that requires, a kind of short, action-y sort of stuff, you've got a huge variety of sounds to pick from there. And then once you've got the idea down, and a lot of film composers write on ensemble patches, and sometimes it's never even broken out, but it's definitely a really valid first point of call. You can then go into the individual sections, or the individual, in this case, soloists, and perform that line so that you get each part separately. So with these performance patches, you've got the ability to the different types of transition between the notes. So you've got a bowed one, which is, you can hear the change in the note, but you've also got these really beautiful. Now, this is another whole area where people kind of endlessly debate exactly how it should be played. And the way that we approach this was...
But that worked for me. I mean, that actually sounded like somebody going to a note as opposed to going... Well,
exactly. And it doesn't have that funny swoop in it. And the answer was really so simple. It's like, say to the players, okay, let's approach each of these individual intervals as you would play them in a chart, and from one string to another. And you end up with something that sounds a lot better. It sounds a lot more... And that's triggered by a lower velocity. But yeah, it's everything is kind of focused in on what are we trying to do here, and what's the style of performance we want, and then we shape the whole product around that.
This is fantastic. There's a part of me that thinks there's got to be people that go in and write in both of these simultaneously.
Yes.
Because if you take the detail work on 2 here and blend it in with all the cinematic feeling of 1,
Yeah.
you're probably getting something that would be almost impossible for anybody to ever tell that it wasn't.
Yeah, and a lot of people when they're writing, if you've got, because everyone loves to have as many musicians as you can. We're all guilty, all composers, especially TV composers,
More
are
is
guilty.
more.
Yeah, they spend all the budget on players because we know it's going to sound better. But if you have a part where, or a track where you're going to be mainly relying on the samples, then the way to bring it to life is to mix together the samples of a section playing and a soloist playing. So if you lay this over the top of the section, you blend it in, and there's lots of options of, we've got a reverb here, and you can pick different things. If we put a hall sound on this, then you get the feel, you can even dial it right up if you want it to sound. It sits beautifully in there, and when you have a section underneath that, you hear, it's a really common performance style. The leader of the section will play slightly over everyone else, and with a little bit of a more kind of intense vibrato, and you're simulating that. And when you have that to hold on to, you get a really incredible end result. It does get difficult sometimes to tell what you're listening to, especially when you've got other, stuff happening at the same time.
I feel like the blend of 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. Very few people on the planet would be able to tell.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
Right, so we've got 2 mixes here. And again, if you kind of hover over the name, you get the detail of what we've got. So in place of our tree on this library, we've got an LCR configuration. And the reason for that is to kind of get it in amongst the players in a slightly more intense and close way. So if I actually just go to the first one, so LCR1, which is the M50s, and then to compare that to LCR2, and if we hover over, we can read our information about that again, and that's the Chandler Reds, the Abbey Road mics.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, they're incredible mics.
Yeah.
On this page, sticking on this page, vintage lines. So on this one, we've got the Red Desk, RS124 compression, and then the J37 tape machine. And that sounds like this.
Mid-range-tastic, wow.
And for the Vintage 2 alternative, we've got ADT on. So that gives you that classic sound. So, gets you kind of, pulls your head, outwards, which is always good. And then looking on the second page, we've got the various options for close mic. So your condensers, which form the kind of main part of mix 1. You've got the ribbons, so that rounds off the top end.
Oh, gorgeous on the high end. It's hard not to want to just use that on everything.
Yeah. So this one, the KM54s for the close vintage. So the actual mics from the original session.
You haven't memorised how to play Eleanor Rigby yet?
No, it's in E minor, isn't it? No, I'm not going to. I'm not going to try and do that. No. So we've got stereo ribbon. So this is the which one's this?
Royer,
the Royer, yeah.
122.
122, yeah. And you can hear the room a lot more, obviously, I guess.
Yeah.
Figure of 8.
Lovely.
Stereo mids. Oh, so mid mics. really useful for getting you kind of closer than the LCR or the tree, but also bringing the instrument kind of forward in the soundstage, and that's used a lot on orchestral sessions. So when they want to pull, like if the cellos are taking the lead and they want to pull them forward, a very popular way of doing that is to pull in the mid mics, which give you, because they're just slightly closer, they give you that slightly better proximity, but don't exclude the room.
Yeah, that's
So
lovely.
yeah, tighter. And then the final one is the ambient mic. Again, kind of as before, this is the most distance.
Absolutely lovely room sound.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. Now I'm asking just for myself, how much is the Abbey Road 2?
Yeah, so you've got two versions of it. So there's the professional version has, all of the mics and all that kind of stuff, and the core version is because there are some people who just want to put up a sound and don't want to fiddle with the mics and stuff like that. And for that, we try and make sure that when we're releasing libraries like this, which obviously, you're talking about weeks of recording and vast expense and time and
the best players.
The best players. It is
probably owning violins costing more than people's houses.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's the. In fact, I had a friend who had I think it's called the King James cello, which is worth about £6 million now, I think. And she used to take it on the tube with her. Session. She was just like, "What's the instrument I'm playing?" It was loaned from the Royal Academy or something. But yeah, with these, we try and make sure that there are kind of access points at different levels, so that people who don't need all this kind of functionality.
This fulfills what we were talking about, though, the only your piano. There's something, even though this is Abbey Road Studio 2, arguably most famous room in recorded history, it still sounds like all the personality.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, you've got there's different things that contribute to that, but the key thing is the players, and the players are just so good at honing in on exactly how to perform things to get the personality into it, but still make it useful enough in a
I feel like one thing that I would suggest to somebody watching is they've already got some strings from whatever they've got, whatever virtual instruments come, even with Logic itself. Blend this into it.
Yeah.
And you immediately make that real.
Yes. Yeah. When you can hear the players, like you were saying earlier about getting humanity into it and getting musicality into it, if you've got an incredible player with that bit of vibrato and, the expressiveness of you, because you can't switch it off. I mean, you put the chart in front of the player and it's just got what they call footballs, just an endless stream of long notes connected, and they've just got one chord to play for 20 seconds. It's still gonna sound musical because they literally can't help themselves. It's very hard for them to try and play something. The classic example, I suppose, is going back to everyone says Psycho, Bernard Herrmann, black and white score, the no vibrato. That's not strictly true, but very limited expressiveness and trying to make it spiky and unpleasant. So it is. You can specify that as a request, but the default position is to play everything musically, and you can't ever switch that off. So being able to hear individual players from a sample library or overdubbed over samples is always going to make it sound so much better.
Okay, so I have one last question.
Yeah.
Did you allow the players to maintain their own intonation?
That's a good question. They
because one person's B flat is not another person's B flat.
So there's a certain amount of correction that we do, and you can't. There is if you do so you can do this kind of stuff with, there are plugins that you can get where you can kind of pitch bend the MIDI on stuff. And I've done it as an experiment on brass instruments. It sounds really, really good on brass instruments, to sometimes change the intonation. And you're not taking it too far away from equal temperament, but if you go slightly towards just and within a chord, it sounds great. The danger is that then things start to kind of fall apart, because the way that it works in a session is obviously that everyone's constantly adjusting to according to what they're hearing around them. And so with the absence of having the piece that you know is going to be performed, we would always tend to pull it in closer to equal temperament, because you know then you're not going to hit any areas where it's going to sound wonky. But you know, it's something that does fascinate me. And I when I was a teenager, I went to see the 16 perform, and at the very beginning of the concert they said, we're going to be singing some pieces in just intonation, and to demonstrate we're going to sing a couple of chords for you so you can hear the difference. And to a 16-year-old, it was absolutely mind-blowing, just hearing a normal chord, and then they said, and now this is how it sounds in just intonation. And it was like, I don't know, it was like all the lights went up. It really bizarre, but it's
my father always used to say, as you go up a scale, the notes are different than when you come down.
Yes. And also, I suppose, you know,
because obviously equal temperament takes, you know, C sharp and D flat, and says here's the approximation.
Yeah.
But C sharp on the way up and D flat on the way down.
Yeah, two different notes.
Yeah, two different notes.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm not, this particular one, Abbey Road 2, it's probably my bias of the love of the room, and obviously the knowledge, because, you know, Eleanor Rigby, for instance, is probably one of the most famous string sections in pop, you know, or rock, whatever the correct word to use is. But yes, I can see it just being so useful for anybody, being able to blend that into, like I was saying earlier, anything, whether they've got synth strings on their just their keyboard itself or whatever. It's going to be completely revolutionary. In fact, in some ways, I kind of encourage that, because then it creates even more individuality. Yeah,
absolutely. And the beauty of having, you know, of having all the instruments separately, you can, and again, I'm not, I don't want to frighten people off who say, oh, I don't know anything about violins and you know, how to orchestrate. But you know, the difference between using violin 1 and violin 2 together, or using violin 2 and the viola, they're two different sounds, and all of these different colors and all of the way that you can kind of change things, and especially with the Pro version, you can pick the mics and all that kind of stuff. It's all about curating the sound that you want to make for your individuality, and to express the thing that means something musically to you. And even from the very, very beginning of, you know, one of the things we hated was, you know, we recorded a bunch of effects for the first bespoke library. And I just said, right, I've got to make them so they're controllable, so you can go from, you know, slow to fast, and you know, up and down in dynamic. Because the one thing we hated was there would be a library come out, and it would have, you know, 10 or 15 orchestral effects in, and then you'd hear the same effects on a soap commercial and on a, you know, documentary about, you know, the life cycle of the fruit fly and things like that. That just sounds rubbish, doesn't it? So it's all about making sure that you've got the control over it, and you can command what's happening musically rather than having it dictated to you.
Wonderful. But what I do love about this is the fact that you've got all the expressiveness in this already. So even if you're a dumb guy like me who's really just a guitar player, I can play some simplistic ideas, and all that expression is there for me. Yeah. Rather than me having to get too clever. I mean, I love all of this, don't get me wrong, but you've already built so much of that in.
Yes.
So a guy like me, this is like mind-blowing, and it's incredible you can do that, but I'm just a dumb guitar player. You know, you've given us all of the expression.
Exactly.
In
then
the
you
performance.
you leave it set, and you just play, and what you hear is, you know, it's
wonderful.
Kind of, wonderful.
Paul, thank you ever so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely wonderful.
Really wonderful.
Thanks you for taking us through all of the library and everything, and it's lovely to know all the history and stuff. I feel like it's funny because you mentioned Spitfire earlier, about the whole idea of, would you say, jam jars and rubber bands and stuff like that?
Yeah.
I do think that the feeling of the necessity being the mother of invention is really beautiful, and it makes sense. And I think it's why your library is so unique, and everything you do is completely unique. So
Thanks
thank you
very
for sharing
much.
the process with us.
Thanks, Warren. Thanks.